There are men who walk through life quietly, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've already lived enough to understand the weight of silence. On a military base, where rank speaks the loudest, one humble janitor kept his head down, raising his little girl and sweeping floors no one noticed. Until the morning, a foreign delegation arrived, and this quiet single father opened his mouth, and the room froze. 9 languages. Perfect. Effortless. And in that stunned silence, a 4-star general saw something the world had missed. What happened next didn't just change his life. It shook the entire base. If stories of hidden strength, quiet dignity, and second chances touch your heart, I invite you gently to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us continue sharing warm, healing stories for those who still believe in courage, goodness, and grace. Now, let us begin. The first light of dawn slipped quietly over Fort Mason, brushing against rows of barracks and the dusty parking lot where military trucks slept in formation. The base had not yet fully woken. Only the hum of generators and the distant clatter of a kitchen preparing early rations broke the silence. The American flag stirred above it all, catching the breeze like a quiet breath before the morning's commands. And there, in the calm before the march of boots, walked Evan Carter. His green work jacket was simple sun-worn at the collar. A white janitor's apron hung loosely across his chest, stained from yesterday's long shift. In one hand, he carried a mop, in the other, a small thermos coffee brewed at home, where he had learned to stretch $1 without bitterness. His hair was slightly long, brushed back, but still playing along his jawline, and his steps were steady, unhurried, purposeful, humble. He did not look like much to the soldiers who jogged past in formation chanting cadence. Most barely noticed him at all. Some nodded politely. A few new recruits didn't bother. To them, he was just another civilian worker, someone who emptied trash bins and polished floors, while they served a country that demanded toughness and sacrifice. They did not know that Evan once belonged to their ranks. They did not know the ribbons tucked away in a drawer he never opened. They did not know the battles he survived, or the ones still living quietly inside his chest. And if he could help it, they never would. At the main courtyard, Evan paused beside a set of benches. Pine needles scattered overnight as they always did. He brushed them aside gently, not because someone demanded it at this early hour, but because he took pride even in the smallest duties. Work done well had dignity. His father once said that. Or maybe he said it to himself enough times that memory had become belief. He opened his thermos, letting steam warm his face in the chilly air. "Daddy," a soft voice behind him. He turned, and there she was, Lily. 8 years old, backpack slung, crookedly blonde curls still messy from sleep. Blue eyes blinking up at the rising sun. She lived on base with him, thanks to a modest worker housing arrangement. Some mornings he walked her to the small school just outside the gates before coming back to mop the halls. Some days he wished he could give her more, but every day he gave her all he had. "You're up early," he murmured, smiling gently as she trotted to his side. "Had a dream." She leaned against his leg, still waking up. "You were flying." Evan's heart paused for just a second. It always did when she mentioned flying, as though part of him still heard the roar of engines and saw the endless horizon he once chased in uniform. But he only ruffled her hair softly. "Sounds like quite a dream." "You looked happy," she added thoughtfully. He swallowed. "I was happy. Because you were watching." Lily grinned, and for a brief moment the world felt just right. Quiet, simple, safe. The kind of morning veterans write letters about, tucked away in memory like a medal inside a desk. Then the rhythm of the bass shifted. Boots scuffed gravel. Radios crackled. Officers strode toward the command building with the urgency of the day's first briefing. A convoy prepared to roll. Soldiers lined up for duty assignments. The machine of military life had awakened fully, now strong and sure. And walking through the center of it, white uniform pristine against the dust and camouflage, came General Grace Whitmore. Her posture was a sculpture of discipline, tall shoulders perfectly set, jaw firm yet elegant. Her hair was pinned neatly, not a strand loose, as if even gravity obeyed her command. Her service ribbons rested neatly across her chest, each a story she never boasted about. Rumor around the base whispered of her brilliance, her relentless resolve, her sorrow spoken only in respectful fragments. She moved like someone who carried weight without letting the world see her bend. Evan watched her only for a second, out of respect more than curiosity. Their worlds rarely intersected. She belonged to steel-lined conference rooms and classified orders. He belonged to quiet corridors and forgotten corners where loneliness had space to breathe. But fate has a habit of turning ordinary mornings into hinges upon which lives move. Grace paused near the entrance steps. 2 foreign military advisors approached her, lost judging by their confused glances, and the map one of them held upside down. A young soldier attempted to assist, speaking English slower and louder, as if volume could bridge continents. Evan recognized the scene instantly. He had seen it 100 times in deployment zones, language barriers turning simple conversations into knots of frustration. He did not step forward to be seen. He simply couldn't walk away without helping. "Excuse me," he said, quietly setting down his mop. The advisors looked over. Their faces carried relief before he even spoke again, perhaps sensing something grounded in his calm presence. Evan greeted them in their native tongue, smooth, respectful, fluent. Their shoulders dropped, confusion dissolving like morning mist. A few soldiers nearby froze mid-stride, startled. The young private blinked, unsure what he heard. Grace Whitmore's eyes lifted, studying the scene. She did not speak, but something shifted in her expression, a faint, almost imperceptible curiosity. Evan continued guiding the advisors, gently explaining directions, clearly using 2 more languages when technical terms came up. 3 tongues in less than 30 seconds, spoken not with performance, but with ease, as though they were pieces of his heartbeat. When the advisors thanked him gratefully and walked off, Evan simply picked up his mop again. No pride, no expectation, no applause needed. He only whispered to Lily, "Ready to get breakfast, sweetheart," as though nothing extraordinary had just occurred. But Grace's gaze did not leave him. And in that moment, the quiet world Evan built carefully, painfully, intentionally shifted. Not with a roar, but with a single silent recognition. There was far more to this janitor than what met the eye. And the base was about to learn that the most powerful stories often begin not with a shout, but with a whisper. Morning rolled into full motion like a rising tide. Fort Mason buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, boots marching in cadence, radios sparking orders, diesel engines grumbling awake. Yet under all that disciplined noise, a quiet ripple of curiosity spread across the base, like wind brushing tall grass. Someone saw, someone whispered, and soon the story traveled faster than most official memos ever did. The janitor just spoke 3 foreign languages, like it was nothing. No one knew his name yet. Some called him the mop guy, others jokingly Sergeant Suds, because military humor rarely needed kindness to be entertaining. But for the first time, eyes turned his way with a mixture of confusion and interest instead of indifference. Evan Carter, however, walked on as if nothing at all had happened. He never looked for spotlights. They had burned him once before. By mid-morning, he was back inside the administrative wing, pushing his cleaning cart down a hallway, lined with framed photographs of commanders, award ceremonies, and memorial plaques honoring fallen heroes. Each name etched into the metal carried a story, some celebrated, some tragic, all sacred. Evan paused, fingertips brushing one particular plaque without actually touching it. A name he once knew, a mission he could never forget. The kind of memory that lived like frost in the soul, painfully clear, always cold. His breath steadied as he forced himself away. Dwelling never helped. Living did. He grabbed a set of keys and entered the briefing room, a space already humming with fluorescent lights and the faint smell of paperwork. He worked silently, wiping tables, straightening chairs, sweeping crumbs left by officers who didn't always have time to eat properly. His hands moved from instinct muscle memory, shaped by years of doing what needed to be done without being asked. Order brings peace, he once believed. Silence brings safety. Routine keeps the heart steady. A door opened behind him. He didn't turn, he didn't need to. The air shifted in a way he recognized. Presence had a weight, especially authority. Especially hers. Mr. Carter. General Grace Whitmore's tone was calm, but it carried that remarkable quality of hers, soft enough to be human, firm enough to remind the world she had climbed to a rank few ever reached. Evan set his rag neatly on the cart before facing her. His posture wasn't military sharp anymore, but it wasn't casual either. Old habits never truly died. They simply rested like soldiers off duty. General, he greeted, voice low, respectful, but not trembling. He did not stand rigid, did not avoid her eyes. He simply existed with the quiet dignity of a man who knew his worth didn't come from uniforms or insignia. Grace studied him for a moment longer than protocol demanded. She was good at reading people, at measuring discipline, ambition, weakness, fear. But Evan's expression gave away nothing. "Walk with me," she said, not quite a request, not quite a command. He followed her out into the corridor. Soldiers passed and stiffened in her presence. A few glanced at Evan, already piecing together rumors. They walked in silence until they reached a quieter outdoor walkway overlooking the training field. Grace folded her hands behind her back, watching a group of recruits practice drills. "You handled that situation this morning with impressive composure," she began. "Just helping," Evan replied softly. "You spoke 3 languages." He didn't answer immediately. "People get lost sometimes. Directions help." Grace turned her face toward him, not aggressively, not interrogating, but with genuine interest burning beneath the surface. "Where did you learn them?" He could have answered truthfully. Battlefields, covert operations, nights studying with a flashlight while the world slept, mornings when he had to speak calm into chaos so no one else died. Instead, he offered the simplest version of truth. "Life teaches what you need," he murmured. A flicker of something crossed her eyes, frustration, admiration. He couldn't tell. She was a fortress made of willpower and discipline. Yet even fortresses have windows if you stand close enough. "You understand this base better than you appear," she said. "I understand people," Evan replied. Uniform or not. Grace's jaw tightened, not insulted, but thoughtful. "Why are you here, Mr. Carter?" "To work," he said. And that was true, but not the whole truth. To raise my daughter, to stay out of the way. Men with skills like yours rarely choose mops and supply closets. His eyes drifted to the parade ground. Men with scars do. Silence, not empty but heavy, meaningful, like 2 souls standing at the edge of a door neither had yet opened. Before Grace could respond, a pair of junior officers hurried over, saluting sharply. "Ma'am, apologies for interrupting. Colonel Abrams requested your presence in the command center. There's been a diplomatic arrival issue." Grace nodded. "I'll be there." Then to Evan. "This conversation isn't finished." He didn't argue. She walked away, her pace, crisp white uniform cutting through the air like a blade. When she disappeared inside the main building, Evan let out a long breath, he hadn't realized he'd been holding. A soldier nearby muttered to his friend, loud enough on purpose, "Guess the janitor's auditioning for something bigger." Snickers followed. Evan didn't react. Not with anger, not with shame. He simply turned back to his cart. The world had always been loud. He had learned long ago that strength is often measured by silence, not reaction. As he pushed his cart toward the next hallway, a voice caught him. "You shouldn't hide it, you know." Evan turned. It was Sergeant Diaz, a seasoned NCO in his late 30s, sharp-eyed, steady, the kind of soldier who carried loyalty like a second shadow. He leaned casually against a column, arms crossed. "I wasn't hiding," Evan replied. Diaz smirked. "Sure you were. You speak 3 languages before sunrise and then mop a hallway like nothing happened. That's not humility, brother. That's camouflage." Evan didn't deny it. Diaz lowered his voice. "Whatever you were, whatever you did, just know some of us notice." A rare flicker of warmth touched Evan's features. "I appreciate that." "You need anything, you come to me," Diaz said. "Men who carry heavy things shouldn't carry them alone." With a nod, he walked off. Evan's grip tightened on the mop handle, not in fear, but in memory, in gratitude, in ache. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "I did once," and it broke people. But the base didn't hear that. The world only saw the man moving forward step by humble step. Later that day, as Evan emptied a trash bin outside the administrative lounge, he noticed officers gathered inside, speaking in hushed urgency. On a nearby screen flickered the image of foreign dignitaries in a tense room. Something had gone wrong. He could feel it in the air, tight, sharp, like a wire stretched too thin. Grace was inside, posture, firm voice, low but commanding. He could not hear her words, but he could read her expression, controlled responsibility, urgency, the quiet fire of someone who protected her people not with noise, but with resolve. He admired that. Quiet strength recognized quiet strength, and neither of them knew it yet, but this was only the beginning. Soon, he would not be just the janitor who spoke 3 languages. Soon, the base would learn the truth. Some heroes don't return to be celebrated. Some return simply to heal. And sometimes, healing others becomes the path back to oneself. By late afternoon, the sun stretched low over Fort Mason, painting long shadows across the pavement, like silent sentinels standing guard. The heat eased, replaced by that crisp breeze soldiers often said smelled like discipline and dust. As the base began its slow transition to evening routines, whispers still floated like low radio static through corridors, chow halls, and the motor pool. It wasn't loud gossip. Nothing in the military spread in chaos. Word traveled in clipped sentences, curious glances, knowing nods. The janitor. No kidding, 3 languages. Smooth as butter. General Whitmore talked to him. You serious? Dead serious. Rumor had turned into attention into quiet respect or suspicion, depending on who listened. Evan Carter, meanwhile, continued pushing his supply cart toward the personnel office, head-lowered movements, efficient and unbothered. He polished a brass door handle until it reflected like gold. He realigned chairs in a waiting area. He fixed a torn edge of a bulletin board like it was a matter of pride, not necessity. Small acts, quiet consistency. That was how he lived. And yet the halls felt different today, not because he had changed, but because the base suddenly realized he existed. Footsteps approached. Evan looked up to see Colonel Abrams' stern-faced, broad-shouldered reputation for being as forgiving as concrete in winter. His steel-gray hair was trimmed immaculately, his gaze always scanning for weakness or disorder. Carter Abrams said curtly. Sir Evan replied, neutral, respectful. You got a moment? It was phrased like a question, but carried a tone that brooked no refusal. "Yes, sir." Abrams stepped closer, eyes narrowing with a look Evan recognized, calculated suspicion mixed with protectiveness of the institution. "This morning." "The language assistants?" Evan nodded once. "Yes, sir." Abrams studied him, silence stretching like a tight wire. "Who trained you?" "Life. Battlefields. Nights where language meant survival. Missions where miscommunication could ignite war." He did not say any of that. "I learned along the way," Evan replied simply. Along the way, Abrams echoed unimpressed. "There are protocols, boundaries. Civilians don't intervene in base matters without clearance." "I saw confusion," I helped Evan said calmly. "That's all?" Abrams' jaw tightened. "Let this be the last time you step in without being asked." A long pause. Evan nodded once. Understood. Abrams held his gaze a second longer, searching for challenge. Finding none, he gave a short grunt and walked away. Evan exhaled quietly. He could have saluted. Old instincts twitched for it. But he didn't belong in that world anymore. Not officially. Not safely. Sometimes the most disciplined thing a man can do is walk away from the life that once defined him. He resumed his route through the corridors, but just as he turned a corner, he stopped. General Grace Whitmore stood beside her office door, arms gently crossed, posture composed, but eyes sharp. She had clearly witnessed the interaction with Abrams. Her gaze met his not as a superior, addressing a subordinate, but as a human, seeing another human quietly enduring. "Colonel Abrams means well," she said, voice steady but softer than usual. His loyalty to protocol sometimes overshadows practicality. "I understand chain of command," Evan replied. "I served once. That was the first time he admitted it out loud on this base." Grace tilted her head slightly, not surprised but confirmed. "Army Air Force. A flicker. Small but real." The Air Force wasn't just a branch to Grace. It was where she lost her husband years ago in a training accident that shaped her life and hardened her heart. Pain recognized pain, even if neither spoke it. "You handled his tone well," she said. "Rank earns respect," Evan answered. Then quietly, "Pain earns patience." Her eyes softened at that, but only for a breath, like sunlight slipping through clouds before discipline reclaimed her face. "You didn't overstep this morning," she said. "In fact, you likely prevented diplomatic embarrassment." "I don't need credit," he said. "Just doing my job." Grace's gaze lingered, observing the humility in him, genuine, not performed. Humility forged in places where pride had no oxygen. "The base could use more eyes like yours," she murmured more to herself than to him. He didn't respond, didn't try to impress her. That stillness in him was not passive. It was strength resting. Grace turned, slightly tapping a file against her palm thoughtfully. "I'd like you to come by my office tomorrow morning." Not a question. Not quite an order either. Somewhere in between, a bridge being built plank by plank. "If this makes you uncomfortable, you may decline," she added, surprising even herself. Evan looked at her. Alcobondo really looked. She was formidable, carved from duty and discipline. Yet there was no arrogance in her only purpose. Command felt natural on her shoulders, but so did quiet sorrow behind her eyes. "I'll be there," he said simply. Grace nodded once. 900. She stepped into her office, but paused. Hand still on the door, back turned. "People underestimate those who choose quiet lives," she said. "But sometimes, quiet is where true strength hides." Then she disappeared inside, leaving silence behind her. A silence filled not with emptiness, but with meaning. Evan stood still for a long moment, absorbing the weight of her words. Then he moved on, returning to his mop bucket, his rags, and the floor that still needed polishing. Evening rolled down like a curtain. Soldiers filed out of training fields. Lights flickered on in barracks windows. The national anthem played before sunset. Flag-lowering ceremony, every soldier standing still, hats over hearts. Evan paused. Mid-mop, placed one hand on his chest and bowed his head. His eyes closed just briefly. Memory flickered, fire in the sky, sand in his mouth, a brother in arms falling beside him, a promise whispered over a battlefield no one visited anymore. He inhaled deeply and returned to the present, to the mop, to humility, to peace earned the hard way. When the anthem ended, so did his pause. He finished his shift quietly, leaving floors shining under fluorescent lights, reflection as clear as truth. Outside, he walked home with Lily at his side, her small hand tucked in his. She swung her legs as she skipped beside him, telling him about school art class and how she learned today that eagles can see 8 times farther than humans. "Daddy," she said suddenly, "do you think eagles get lonely up there all by themselves?" Evan looked at her, startled by the innocence yet depth of the question. "Sometimes," he answered. "But they fly anyway, because that's what they were born to do." She smiled, satisfied. "I want to fly too someday." His throat tightened. "You will. In your own way." And as they disappeared into the soft amber dusk, the world didn't see a hero returning home. It saw a single father holding his daughter's hand. But fate had already shifted. The quiet janitor had been seen, not as a worker, but as a man with a story. And tomorrow, the woman with stars on her shoulders would open a door he never thought he'd face again. Fort Mason woke with precision and rhythm the next morning. Revel sounded at 600 boots, struck pavement in unified cadence, and radios carried clipped voices across the grounds. The base breathed duty. Structure? Purpose. Inside worker housing, Evan Carter laced his boots quietly, the same modest pair he'd worn for years. No shine required no uniform inspections in this life. Yet he tied them with ritual care, a small act of order, in a world he tried to keep simple. Lily was still asleep, arm wrapped around her stuffed fox, one curl sticking adorably to her cheek. He brushed it gently aside and kissed her forehead. He whispered, "Be kind today." Her lips curved in a sleepy half-smile. "Always, Daddy." He left her door cracked so she wouldn't wake to silence. Or fail for 8 hours. Evan stood outside General Grace Whitmore's office, mop bucket nowhere in sight today. He hadn't known whether to bring it. Habit told him yes, instinct told him no. So he arrived with nothing but steady posture and unsure breath. Across the hallway, 2 junior officers pretended to sort papers, but stole looks at him, whispering behind clipped folders. "Why's he here, General's office, man? Something's up. You think he's no idea." Rumor again, familiar, still unwelcome. At precisely 1900, the door opened. A young aide back, painfully straight, motioned. "She'll see you now." Evan nodded, stepping inside. Grace Whitmore's office was an exercise in disciplined elegance, walls lined with framed commendations and strategic maps, Afghanistan, Eastern Europe, Pacific theaters. A folded flag rested in a glass case near a photograph of a man in uniform, handsome eyes, bright smile strong. Evan recognized the look of someone who had died serving his country. He did not look too long. Grace stood by the window reviewing documents on a digital tablet. Morning light traced sharp angles across her uniform shoulders, catching silver hair strands she never bothered to hide. Strength did not pretend with her. Neither did time. "You came," she said, not looking up yet. "You asked," Evan replied. She lifted her eyes. "Many don't answer calls they don't understand." "Some calls," he said quietly, "don't need understanding, just respect." Their gazes held. Neither looked away. 2 disciplined souls forged in different battles meeting on common ground. "Sit," she said gently. He did. Grace set the tablet down. "I made inquiries. He didn't stiffen, but the room felt smaller suddenly. About me. Yes, she answered openly. Evan's jaw relaxed, not in surrender, but acceptance. And she folded her hands. Your service record is sealed. Some things are better left closed. Her eyes sharpened slightly. Sealing doesn't always mean shame. No, Evan said softly. Sometimes it means protection. Grace studied him in silence before speaking again. You were recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross. A stillness settled. Evan didn't blink. I declined, he said calmly. I know. She leaned forward, voice quiet. Why his fingers curled slightly against his thigh. Because recognition doesn't bring back what you lose earning it. Grace inhaled slowly a breath, like someone who understood too well. You protected someone. A pause. Then I failed someone. Their eyes locked, and Grace understood then what most would miss. He wasn't hiding shame. He was honoring ghosts. She softened. You didn't fail. You don't know the mission, he replied gently. I don't need to know. I know the look of a man who carries loyalty heavier than regret. His eyes lowered. Not in weakness, but in humility. I didn't come here to relive the past, General. And yet, she said quietly, the past shapes every step you take. He met her gaze again, slowly, honestly. Some of us walk quietly so others don't have to. Grace's expression shifted, not admiration yet, but recognition. She moved around the desk, sitting closer, not across from him, like a superior grilling a subordinate, but beside him, like someone seeking truth. This base is receiving a joint diplomatic delegation tomorrow, she said. Complex languages, politically sensitive environment. Missteps could spiral. Evan listened calmly. I want you in the room, she continued. His body didn't move, but something behind his eyes shifted like water, disturbed beneath still ice. I'm maintenance staff. You're more. Her tone held zero doubt. That's not my place anymore. Why did you intervene yesterday, then? Grace asked. Most would have walked by. Someone needed help. And you acted. She nodded once, slowly. Your instinct is service, even when no rank compels it. He looked down. Instinct isn't authority, and humility isn't weakness, Grace replied. You navigate people, not just languages. That's rare. He let the moment breathe, choosing silence instead of argument. Then quietly, this isn't my world anymore. General. Grace's voice lowered, never pleading, never commanding. Just true. Maybe the world isn't done with you yet. A crack, a hairline fracture in the armor he spent years building. Not broken, but touched. Evan exhaled softly. If I step wrong, you won't. And if I do, he pressed gently. The consequences aren't yours to carry. They're mine. For the first time, her voice warmed past duty. Burden shared is burden halved. That struck him. Hard. Because only someone who had carried unbearable weight would speak it. He nodded once. Slow. Sincere. I'll assist. Quietly. Temporarily. Grace didn't smile fully, but something eased in her eyes. Good. The door clicked open again. Abrams walked in mid-sentence. Ma'am, we need updated. He froze, saw Evan sitting there. Expression flashed, surprise, suspicion, irritation. What's he? Carter will provide linguistic support tomorrow, Grace interrupted. Tone absolute. Abrams blinked. With respect, ma'am, that's highly irregular. So is losing diplomatic trust due to avoidable miscommunication. Abrams' jaw flexed. We have professionals trained. He has instincts earned in places. Textbooks don't cover. Grace cut in. Silence. Abrams shifted strategies. Liability. I assume full responsibility. Abrams paused. The room held its breath. He swallowed whatever protest simmered in his throat, nodded stiffly, and left. When the door shut, Evan spoke quietly. "You didn't have to defend me." Grace looked at him, a steady, level gaze, meaning, "Yes, I did." Strength doesn't always roar, Mr. Carter. Sometimes it stands quietly beside someone. For the first time, Evan looked away, not from shame, but because gratitude can feel heavier than judgment. He left her office soon after the conversation, lingering like the afterglow of something significant. Outside, the wind carried faint sounds of soldiers drilling boots, pounding in unison, structure, purpose, belonging. Evan walked past them, shoulders steady, face neutral, heart unexpectedly unsettled. Diaz spotted him from afar and jogged over. "You okay, man?" Evan nodded. Diaz chuckled. "Heard the brass noticed you. Didn't think it'd be that brass. Just helping," Evan said. Diaz smirked. Sometimes just helping changes things more than orders. They shared a brief nod, men who understood weight without needing details. That night, Evan tucked Lily into bed. She traced a crayon drawing beside her, him holding her hand, both smiling beneath a blue sky and small, scribbled hearts. "Daddy," she whispered. "Yes, you look tired." He brushed her hair gently. "Just thinking." "About hard things?" she asked softly. "Yes," he admitted. She placed her tiny hand over his. "You always find the right thing to do." His breath caught. Her trust was the purest truth he knew. "I try," he whispered. I know, she whispered back. "That's why you don't need a uniform. You're already my hero." His eyes closed, not from pain, from something deeper, healing, beginning to stir. Outside his window, lights glimmered across the base, stars fallen to earth, waiting to be earned. Somewhere in the command building, Grace reviewed tomorrow's plan, her thoughts returning again and again to the quiet man who swept hallways like sacred ground. 2 lives, 2 worlds drawn slowly, inevitably toward intersection, not with noise, not with force, but with quiet recognition. The next morning dawned with a tension that seemed woven into the air. Fort Mason buzzed with preparations for the diplomatic briefing, like a hive disturbed, yet disciplined. Vehicles were positioned, conference rooms, polished flags, straightened until every crease seemed ironed by duty itself. The scent of coffee metal and fresh paper filled the corridors. Everyone moved with purpose, and amid it all, a janitor walked quietly with a folder tucked under one arm. Evan Carter wore clean work pants and a pressed shirt, not because he needed to impress, but because respect, like discipline, was a habit he never shed. He didn't wear rank decorations or insignia. He carried dignity and silence. In the hallway outside the main briefing room, a group of junior officers huddled near a water dispenser, eyes darting toward him. "That's him," one murmured. "The janitor. He's not just a janitor." General hand-picked him. "Yeah, but why him over the translators? Maybe he saved the president, and we just don't know," someone joked too loudly. A nervous laugh echoed, but no one truly laughed. Soldiers could smell mystery the way wolves smell storm air. Evan didn't react. He stood calm, clasping his hands lightly in front of him, waiting for instructions he never asked to receive. His heart beat, steady, slow, grounded. But inside, memories flickered. Conference tables half a world away. Sweat dripping while diplomats argued over borders like chess pieces. Words used like weapons, accuracy as vital as any rifle shot. Back then he wore a uniform. Today he wore humility. General Grace Whitmore approached from the far end of the corridor, stride, sharp expression composed like granite, warmed by a hidden ember. Conversation ceased as she passed. Her authority didn't demand silence, it commanded it. She stopped beside Evan. "You ready?" she asked quietly. "No one is ever ready for diplomacy," he replied. "But I'll be present." Grace allowed the smallest breath of amusement. Presence is often what changes outcomes. They entered together, Inside the conference room resembled a small war room dressed in diplomacy's clothing. National flags lined the walls, a polished oak table gleamed at the center, and screens displayed live feeds from international military observers. High-ranking officers filled seats, American allied partners, and 3 foreign advisors, whose expressions already carried strain. 2 translators stood ready with headsets, tablets, and formal posture. Colonel Abrams noticed Evan and stiffened. "Carter," he said flatly. "Stand by the back, no speaking unless asked." Evan nodded. Understood. He didn't bristle. He didn't shrink. He simply took position along the wall, quiet as a retired blade returning to its sheath. Grace's gaze flicked briefly to Abrams, unreadable but sharp. Then she called the room to order. "Begin." The first 20 minutes passed smoothly. Introductions, agenda review, firm nods, polite diplomatic phrasing. The translators handled initial exchanges well enough, though they worked with textbook precision rather than lived fluency. Then the foreign general leaned forward, brows tight. He spoke rapidly, words sharp with meaning the translators struggled to catch. One translated phrase stumbled, twisting an idiom into something bordering on offense. A shift rippled across the room, subtle but dangerous. Miscalculation. Misinterpretation. These were how wars sometimes began. Grace lifted a brow, sensing the tremor beneath diplomacy's surface. Her gaze flicked toward Evan. He stepped forward before being called, but not arrogantly, just with calm certainty, like a man stepping into rain knowing he won't drown. With respectful tone and posture lowered slightly, not a challenge, but honor, he translated the foreign general's meaning, precisely restoring nuance, returning dignity both directions. He spoke softly, smooth, balanced, like a man placing stones across a river for others to cross safely. The tension thinned. The foreign general's eyes widened slightly. Then he nodded with genuine respect. A small ripple of acknowledgement rolled across the table. But the translators stiffened, pride bruised. Whispers rustled from 2 seats down. "Who is this guy?" Colonel Abrams leaned back, jaw tight. He said nothing, but resentment curled like smoke behind his eyes. The discussion resumed, and Evan returned to the wall. He did not bask. He did not seek approval. He simply listened, attuned not only to words but tones, breaths, glances, cultural pauses. 1 hour in another, misunderstanding emerged this time from an American officer, inadvertently implying military oversight in a way that sounded like territorial intrusion. A fraught moment. The room chilled. Grace exhaled slowly. Evan stepped forward again, not waiting for chaos to bloom. He lowered his voice tone, gentle, offering an alternate phrasing with grace and humility, not undermining the officer, but enriching the meaning like polishing tarnished silver rather than discarding it. The foreign delegation relaxed. Not a crisis averted, just tension dissolved by human understanding. Yet those small dissolutions build peace, brick by brick. As the meeting adjourned for a short break, murmurs filled the room again. Not dismissive this time, but curious, impressed, reluctant, begrudging admiration. A foreign advisor approached Evan directly. "You speak like someone who has sat at tables in dangerous rooms," he observed. Evan dipped his head respectfully. "I've sat in many rooms." "That is not an answer," the man replied with a knowing half-smile. "It is the only one I live with comfortably," Evan said quietly. The man nodded as warriors do when recognizing wounds carried without display. Grace approached next. "You handled that well." "I didn't do anything," he said. Her brow lifted. "You guided conflict without force. That is doing more than most." Evan looked down briefly. "Years ago, someone once told me, the person who speaks softly in chaos is the one who truly understands war." Grace inhaled. a wise mentor, a fallen friend. Silence stretched, respectful, solemn. "Sometimes the dead teach us longer than the living," she murmured. He lifted his gaze. Their eyes met. Not soldier to janitor, not officer to civilian, but two hearts familiar with loss, giving it dignity rather than defeat. Lunch was simple military fare, nothing fancy. Evan sat alone by habit, not exclusion. But today someone joined him. Sergeant Diaz plopped down beside him with a grin. "Heard you saved the meeting." "Again." I translated, Evan corrected. "You prevented 3 colonels and a diplomat from giving each other migraine headaches," Diaz said. "That's saving lives in paperwork terms." Evan almost laughed, a rare, soft exhale. "Not sure about that." "I am. I've seen less stressful firefights." Diaz lowered his voice. "Notice how none of the brass thanked you." Evan shrugged slowly. "Service isn't always rewarded. Doesn't make it less service." Diaz nodded with respect. "I ever get transferred, I'm taking you as my personal conscience." "Terrible idea," Evan said, but his eyes warmed. Back in the conference room, the afternoon segment shifted from policy to lived experience, cultural expectations, military ethics, alliance commitments. This part wasn't linguistics, it was humanity. And here, Evan did not translate words. He translated heart. When an ally struggled to explain a concept rooted in honor tradition, Evan framed it with American values without diminishing its origin. When a colonel misspoke lightly, Evan smoothed tone with humble clarification. He stepped forward only when needed, not claiming spotlight, offering guidance, like a compass held in steady hands. And Grace watched him, the way a commander watches a rare instrument, precise, invaluable, quietly powerful. She saw discipline without command, skill without ego, strength without show, and most dangerous of all, in her tightly fortified heart. She saw goodness, not the naive kind, the hard-earned kind, the kind forged through fire and chosen again each morning. A rare strength, a quiet strength. Her gaze sharpened not in power but curiosity, and something more tender, carefully guarded. When the meeting concluded, successfully, applause did not erupt. Diplomacy does not celebrate it. Exhales. But as officers shook hands, gave nods, exchanged controlled praise, the foreign general approached Evan personally. "You honor both nations by how you speak," he said in accented English. Evan bowed his head slightly. "Honor lives in listening more than speaking." "A rare philosophy among military men," the general replied. "Rare only among loud ones," Evan said gently. "The quiet ones carry most." Grace heard that, and for the first time her lips softened almost a smile. Almost. Outside, as sunlight bruised into evening gold, Evan walked the quiet path back to housing. His stride measured his heartbeat, steady his mind, restless, not from stress, but from being seen. Not as a custodian, not as a ghost of service, but as a force still capable of shaping the world gently. He wasn't sure whether that comforted or frightened him. As he reached the door, Lily burst out, backpack still half open, hair wild. "Daddy!" I drew a new picture, and the world shrank, not to insignificance, but to meaning. She held the drawing proudly. It showed him standing tall in front of a big room, with flags, people listening to him. "You helped today," she said with childish certainty. He kneeled, voice soft. How do you know that she tapped her heart? "Sometimes I just know things." He closed his eyes, hugging her close. In her arms he felt peace he never found in war rooms or battlefields. In her small voice he heard the only rank that mattered: Daddy. My daddy. And somewhere across the base, General Grace Whitmore stood alone in her office window, watching soldiers go about their evening. Unaware, she whispered to herself, "Strength comes in many uniforms. Some are simply made of grace. The days that followed brought a quiet shift across Fort Mason, subtle but impossible to ignore. Respect travels softly in the military. Admiration even quieter. Soldiers who once passed Evan Carter without a second glance now offered small nods. A few even greeted him. Not loudly, not ceremoniously, just little acknowledgments that said, "We saw." Evan didn't revel in it. He carried the attention the way he carried everything, gently with humility, as if too strong a grip might shatter the fragile peace inside him. But the air around him had changed, and wherever attention flows, envy always follows, like a shadow. Colonel Abrams watched from afar, jaw set in perpetual tension. Pride had kept him afloat through his career, and pride now burned like acid in the back of his throat. A janitor stepping into my arena in front of foreign brass, with the general's blessing. To a man like him, status wasn't just structure, it was survival. Evan's quiet presence threatened that, not through ambition, but through existence. And for some, existence alone is offense. On a brisk morning 2 days after the diplomatic briefing, Evan was mopping a hallway outside the legal affairs office when voices drifted through the half-open door. Classified case file resurfaced, one officer murmured. Name asked another. Carter. Evan Carter. Evan froze, not visibly just inside. He steadied his grip on the mop handle. Breath quiet, heartbeat slow but heavier. The voices continued. It's odd. The commendation nomination disappears, then disciplinary notes appear instead. That doesn't just happen. General wants the truth, the other replied. She's digging. Grace, digging into his past. His chest tightened, not from guilt, but from memory. Some truths don't protect. They wound. He stepped back, letting the door close fully, and resumed cleaning. Surface calm inner tide rising. Elsewhere on base, General Grace Whitmore stood in her private briefing room, arms folded, eyes, scanning a restricted personnel file displayed on a secure screen. Major Amanda Rhodes, head of intelligence coordination, stood beside her, sharp-minded, quietly formidable, the kind of officer whose loyalty to truth came with surgical precision. "You sure you want to peel this?" Rhodes asked. "Some records are sealed for a reason." "I want to know the man I'm trusting," Grace said, "and the man I'm risking him becoming again." Rhodes studied her. "Trust isn't your usual play." Grace didn't deny it. "This one deserves clarity." Rhodes tapped the file. "Mission in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. Joint ops with Allied special units. Hostage extraction." Grace's breath caught. "And the failure official report says Carter disobeyed direct orders, diverted from mission plan, compromised operational chain." Grace's brows narrowed sharply. That's the version written by someone protecting themselves. Rhodes nodded once. "Likely. Casualties: 1 ally killed, 2 local civilians injured, hostages saved." Grace stared at the screen. Saved. Rhodes softened. Then he didn't fail. Grace's voice lowered, heavy with quiet conviction. "Some victories are written as failures by people who didn't bleed for them." Rhodes tapped further. He also shielded a young comms tech when the extraction convoy came under RPG fire. Took shrapnel for it. Medical report logged and buried. Grace inhaled hard, not sympathy, but recognition. He took a fall to protect someone. And someone let him. Rhodes confirmed. Grace clenched her hands behind her back, posture rigid, not from anger, but from respect and sorrow. She was a woman who understood sacrifice carved into bone loss, carried like another limb. "Who sold him out?" she asked. Rhodes hesitated, voice lower. Abrams was in the oversight chain. Grace closed her eyes briefly. Restraint, fighting fury. When she opened them again, steel tempered her gaze. "He didn't lose his honor," she said quietly. "It was taken." Rhodes lowered her tablet. "What do you want to do?" Grace answered without hesitation. "Restore truth." And Carter. He asked for peace, not redemption, Grace murmured. He didn't come to rise again. He came to survive. Rhodes nodded. Then the question isn't whether he's worthy of more. Grace looked toward the window, watching soldiers march in formation. It's whether we allow a good man to remain invisible because it's convenient. Later that afternoon, Grace found Evan wiping fingerprints from a glass walkway railing, quiet, precise, focused. She watched him a moment before speaking, voice low but steady. You served in Kunar province. Evan's hand paused just for a breath, then continued. Long time ago. You saved hostages, she said. Some, he answered. You shielded a young operator. She continued. Silence. And someone erased that. He didn't turn to her. You looked. Yes. Why you deserve truth. I deserve quiet, he replied softly. Quiet isn't the same as being erased, she said. I wasn't erased, he whispered. I walked away. She stepped closer. Not imposing, standing beside rather than above. You took blame that wasn't yours. I carried what needed to be carried, so someone else didn't have to. He stopped wiping, leaned slightly on the rail. It was the right thing. Was it fair? She asked. He finally turned to her eyes, steady but world-worn. Fair doesn't always save people. Doing what's right does. She studied him, breath deep with emotion she rarely let surface. Good men shouldn't have to bleed alone. He shook his head slightly. Every good soldier bleeds alone. That's how we keep others warm. Grace felt that like a blade wrapped in truth. And yet she said softly, You raised a daughter to see light, not wounds. His voice gentled. She's the reason I learned peace, and the reason you hide. Grace asked, not accusing, seeking. To protect her from the weight I used to carry, he whispered. A man can break quietly, but a child should never break watching him. Grace's eyes softened, war giving way to something human. Her voice dropped to just above a whisper. She deserves a father who stands unburdened. And you deserve a life not spent apologizing for surviving. Evan exhaled, slow, heavy. I'm not a hero, General. I never said you were. Her tone warmed. Heroes chase glory. You carry loss with grace. He blinked. Grace. The irony didn't escape him, and she added almost gently, You're not invisible anymore. That unsettled him more than judgment ever had. Word reached Abrams within hours. Grace digging through sealed files, whispers of old truths resurfacing. His fists clenched around a stack of reports. She's elevating him, going to rewrite history for a janitor. His pride hissed, pride fed by insecurity. This ends before it starts. The storm brewing in him was not loud yet, but storms rarely begin loud. They begin with pressure. That evening, Evan walked home slower than usual. Lily ran to him on the path, backpack bouncing, eyes bright. Daddy. My teacher says I speak kindly. She said not everyone knows how to do that. He knelt, heart warmed. Kindness is a language too. She hugged him tight. Mom would be proud of you. He froze. Rarely did she mention her mother. Loss touched her life young, yet she never let it harden. Her only deepen her empathy. She'd be proud of you more, he whispered. Lily looked up, smiling gently. We're okay, Daddy. We're not broken. He kissed her forehead. No, we bend. We don't break. And as they walked inside, the quiet man and his bright-souled daughter Sunset painted Fort Mason in gold. Grace watched from her office window, an untouched cup of coffee cooling beside her. She didn't see a janitor. She didn't see a soldier. She saw a man who chose humility over glory, burden over bitterness, love over legacy, and she felt something she hadn't allowed in years, hope. Night at Fort Mason fell softly. No fanfare, no applause, just the quiet dignity of an American military base settling into its bones. Floodlights cast long halos across empty parade grounds. Boots softened into footsteps, then into whispers, then into silence. It was a night where the world felt held together by discipline and prayer. Inside the small base cafe, lights dimmed chairs, stacked machines humming in sleepy rhythm, Evan Carter sat alone at a corner table. He wasn't hiding. He was breathing. Letting the stillness unclench the fists life sometimes made inside the heart. He cupped a mug of lukewarm coffee, not drinking, just holding warmth. There are nights when a man needs warmth more than caffeine. The door opened quietly. Grace Whitmore stepped inside. Not the general now, at least not in posture. She had removed her cap hair, softening around her face, rank tucked respectfully into the background. She spotted him immediately. A lesser man might have stood. A lesser man might have saluted. Evan simply straightened his spine and nodded, once acknowledging presence in a position. "May I sit?" she asked. "You don't need my permission," he said gently. She gave a faint, almost smile. "I didn't ask out of rank." He gestured to the seat across from him. For a few breaths, they simply sat. Two quiet lives, two heavy histories meeting not in duty but in pause. Grace broke the silence first. "I reviewed more of your file." He didn't tense. Instead, he took a slow breath. "That's dangerous reading." "Truth usually is," she replied softly. He looked down at the table. "Some chapters aren't meant to be revisited. They're lessons," she said. He met her eyes. Storm met steel. Steel softened. "You think I'm running from something," he murmured. "I think," she said carefully. "You walked away carrying too much weight. And you haven't set it down." His fingers tightened around the mug, then relaxed. "Setting it down means remembering who I was. And staying silent means letting others define who you are." He shook his head slowly. "No. Silence means accepting I don't need the world to know." "What if the world needs you?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. He stared at the table, seeing memories, not wood grain dust. Blood, a broken radio, a young soldier crying in his arms because orders betrayed them, and the world wasn't gentle enough to save the innocent. He swallowed. "I'm not stepping back into a battlefield." Grace leaned forward, elbows gently against the table. "I didn't ask you to fight. I asked you to stand. There's no difference for some men," he whispered. "Then don't stand as a soldier," she replied. "Stand as the man your daughter believes in." That cracked something. Not broken, opened. Evan looked away, voice low. "You don't know what she saved me from?" Grace's eyes softened. "Then tell me." A long silence. Not thick, not suffocating. Heavy like a truth waiting to breathe. He lifted his gaze slowly. When he spoke, there was no performative pain, no dramatization. Just truth, spoken like an oath. "On my last mission, I had a choice: follow orders and leave civilians behind, or break chain and try to save them." Grace listened without interruption. "I made the call. My men followed me. We saved them." His voice softened further. "But one of ours didn't make it out." "And you carried that," she said gently. "I carried the weight," he breathed. "But I wasn't the weight." Grace stilled, sensing layers deeper still. "But that wasn't the moment that ruined me," he continued quietly. She waited. "It was coming home," he whispered. "Seeing my baby girl take her first steps and realizing I didn't feel joy, only guilt." Grace's throat tightened, not in judgment, but recognition. She had felt that once after losing her husband, the first time she laughed and hated herself for it. Survivor's guilt had many uniforms. "I looked at her," Evan murmured, "and I realized I could walk through gunfire easier than I could hold my own daughter, without remembering the young man who died, calling me sir." Grace exhaled slowly. So you chose a quieter life. I chose to be her father instead of a ghost in uniform, he said. And you succeeded, Grace whispered. He blinked. Did Ailey looks at you like you hung the moon, Grace said softly. No medal outranks that. For the first time, he didn't look away. What about you? Who did you walk away? For Grace's jaw tightened, but not in anger. In vulnerability. My husband was a pilot, lost in a readiness exercise gone wrong. After that, duty was easier than feeling. And strength became armor, Evan said gently. And tenderness became weakness, she whispered. They sat in shared truth. 2 wars, one fought overseas, one fought inside. Evan's voice shifted quieter, deeper. You don't have to be stone all the time. And you don't have to be shadow, she replied. His breath trembled, not fear. Release. Recognition. Outside, night deepened. The base slept. Duty rested. But here, 2 people finally exhaled years of silence. Grace stood slowly. Tomorrow we face pressure again. Not bullets. Eyes, questions, intentions. Diplomacy is its own battle. I'll be there, Evan said. I know, she replied. That's why I trust you. He looked up, surprised by the simplicity of her certainty. She turned to leave, but paused. Evan. He rarely heard his first name spoken here. Spoken gently, it startled him. You don't owe the world penance, she said quietly. You owe your daughter peace. And what do you owe yourself? He asked softly. Grace didn't turn. Permission to feel again. She left. And the room, though dim, felt lighter. Something unshackled. Something beginning. Evan sat a moment longer, breath steadying. Then he whispered to the empty cafe, and maybe to the version of himself he once knew. It's okay to come home. When he returned to housing, Lily stirred in her sleep. He tucked the blanket around her small body. She murmured, Daddy. Safe. He touched her cheek. Always. And in the still quiet dark, for the first time in years, Evan allowed himself a moment of fragile hope. Because healing was not weakness. It was the bravest kind of strength. Outside his window, the base floodlights hummed softly, as if standing guard, not just over soldiers, but over wounded hearts, learning to breathe again. And somewhere in a high office lit by one lone lamp, General Grace Whitmore sat with her hand resting over her husband's folded flag, and whispered to herself, You don't have to walk alone forever. Tension has a sound, not always a shout or a siren or a gunshot. Sometimes it's silence too sharp, too sudden, like the pause right before a glass shatters. That morning, Fort Mason woke not to routine, but to tension. You could feel it in the air, in the clipped voices over radios, in the footsteps that moved faster than usual. Diplomats and foreign officers arrived in convoys. Security tightened. Protocol thickened like cold air before a storm. And storms didn't always carry rain. Some carried misunderstanding. And misunderstanding in military corridors could ignite like dry brush in summer. Evan walked his usual path with his mop and bucket, but unlike other mornings, he wasn't invisible. Soldiers nodded. Some stood a little straighter near him, not to impress him, but as if sensing steadiness in his presence. Quiet strength moves through rooms, like gravity felt not seen. He reached the main conference wing. The double doors ahead were guarded by MPs, and the hum of international conversation leaked through the cracks, languages layered over one another, frustration threading beneath. He paused to set down his mop. That's when Sergeant Diaz appeared beside him, breath quick from moving fast. Something's brewing inside, Diaz murmured quietly. Tone shifted. Feels wrong. Evan's jaw tightened. What happened? No idea, but the room feels like it's holding its breath. Evan nodded once. Tell Grace I'm here. Diaz didn't question. He simply turned and disappeared into the storm. Inside, General Grace Whitmore stood at the head of the long table posture, iron straight, yet tension rippling subtly through her shoulders. Diplomats debated sharply in overlapping voices. Military advisors exchanged tight whispers. A foreign colonel pounded a fist softly, not in aggression but emphasis. This directive reads like armed surveillance. We cannot allow troops stationed here under those terms. An American deputy snapped back. It is protective oversight, not surveillance. No, it is intrusion disguised in uniform, another foreign representative retorted. One translator scrambled to keep pace. Another missed a nuance and turned oversight into a phrase closer to control. A dangerous shift. The temperature in the room dropped even as voices rose. Abrams leaned in, face flushed. We are offering mutual protection. You are offering dominance. Someone fired back. And just like that, panic flickered in the room, like the first spark in a field of dry grass. Grace lifted a hand. Gentlemen, breathe. But everyone spoke at once. The translator struggled, tension spiraling into escalation. Even silence couldn't cut through it. Now it was too thick. A single wrong word could mean months of broken trust between nations. Outside the door, Evan heard the voices sharpen, not in volume, but in tone. Tone always tells the truth before words do. He stepped inside quietly, unnoticed at first. Abrams saw him, and his face hardened. You don't belong here. Leave. But Grace raised her hand, stopping him cold without looking. Let him speak. The room quieted, confusion mixed with curiosity. Evan walked to the table slowly, posture unassuming yet steady, like a man stepping into a room, not to take control, but to offer peace a place to sit. He bowed his head respectfully to both sides. Then he spoke, not loudly. Calmly. Each word placed like a stone across a river. He began in English, voice warm and grounded. We stand here not as nations measuring authority, but as people trying to prevent future hurt. Then, in the foreign delegate's language, he continued, keeping tone soft, unthreatening. If we look at protection through pride, it becomes control. If we see it through responsibility, it becomes partnership. A murmur rippled, but not hostile. Curious, hesitating, cooling. Then he translated for the Americans. Their concern is not about your intention, but about what future powers might do without the same restraint. Trust is built not by saying, we mean well, but by proving we will not forget fairness. Silence deepened, not the dangerous kind this time, but the stillness before clarity settles. He returned to the foreign side. Oversight without transparency feels like chains, even if forged with good intentions. But shared security openly agreed upon becomes shield, not cage. Someone exhaled shakily. Someone else lowered their shoulders. His voice gentled further as he alternated languages seamlessly. Misunderstanding is the enemy in this room, not each other. Fear speaks quickly. Trust needs time. We all want peace. So let us not treat allies as threats. He wasn't performing. He wasn't negotiating. He was translating humanity, not politics. And slowly, the storm receded. Breaths steadied. Arms uncrossed. Eyes softened. Like a chord coming back into tune, the room found harmony again. Quiet, fragile, but real. Grace watched him, not as a general evaluating an asset, but as a woman witnessing grace in motion. Not the kind named after medals or ranks, grace chosen, in moments when power would be easier than patience. When Yvonne finished, he stepped back. Continue, he said softly. Together. No applause. No praise. Not that kind of room. But no one interrupted, and no one dismissed him now. The foreign colonel inclined his head with genuine respect. "Your service does not end because your uniform changed," he said in English. Evan only bowed his head. Neither does peace. Outside, when it finally adjourned, Grace approached him in the hallway. Her voice, usually controlled, as steel, carried a rare tone, now something deeper, almost proud. "You didn't de-escalate a room," she said quietly. "You de-escalated fear." Evan looked up, eyes steady but tired. Fear listens to kindness faster than commands. Grace studied him. "You don't act like a man who lost his place." Evan answered softly. "I act like a man who finally learned where he belongs." "And where is that?" she asked. He breathed in slow, steady. "With my daughter. In peace. Serving quietly." Grace's voice thickened, not with pity, but emotion hard-won. Peacekeepers often never find peace themselves. He nodded once. "I'm trying, and you're succeeding more than you know." Their eyes held for a long, quiet moment. Not intimate yet, but tender. Two hearts no longer armored against hope. Diaz appeared breathless and grinning. "You just prevented 20 years of international headaches, amigo." Evan gave a gentle half-smile. "I prevented a misunderstanding. That's all." Diaz snorted. "That's how wars start, and how good men stop them." Abrams walked by, stiffness carved into his posture. He didn't speak, but his silence carried a warning the simmer before boil. Grace noticed, and her eyes hardened not in anger, but in readiness. Protective. Evan didn't see himself as someone who needed defending. But sometimes strength lies not in standing alone, but being allowed to stand with someone. That night, Lily climbed onto Evan's lap with her sketch pad. "Daddy, guess what I drew?" He looked. It was him again, standing between two groups of stick figure people, hands, open, smile, peaceful. "What's this one?" he asked softly. She beamed. "You kept people safe today." His throat tightened. "How did you know?" She tapped her chest. "Because when someone is good, you can feel it here." Evan hugged her. His heart steadied. In another building, Grace stood alone by her window, watching lights fade across the base. She whispered a truth she hadn't allowed herself in years. Some heroes whisper. And just like that, the quiet man who once tried to disappear had done the one thing he never expected. He became seen, not for rank, not for glory, but for character. And that kind of recognition is the hardest to earn, and the most impossible to hide. The morning after the crisis dawned clean and golden, as if the sky itself wanted to wash away yesterday's strain. Soldiers moved with renewed purpose, conversations low and steady, order restored, trust stabilized. And yet Fort Mason felt different. Not loud, not frantic, but quietly aware that something had shifted beneath its foundations. Evan Carter walked along the walkway between administration buildings, the soft scrape of his boots matching the slow rhythm of his thoughts. He carried his cleaning cart again deliberately firmly, as though anchoring himself in simplicity, before the world tried to name him something else. He had prevented escalation, translated peace, steadied a room of egos and flags. But this morning, he polished door handles like any other day. You cannot polish pride without dulling peace. And Evan chose peace. Sergeant Diaz approached, coffee in hand. "Morning, brother." Evan nodded. "Morning." "You slept at all?" Diaz asked, eyes narrowing as if he could detect truth in the lines of Evan's face. "A little." "Liar," Diaz said lightly. "You got the 'I carried the world yesterday' look. It was just people talking," Evan replied. Diaz chuckled. "When you do it, it's diplomacy. When I do it, it's gossip." Evan almost smiled. "We all have roles." "Yeah," Diaz muttered. "Some of ours just need updating." Before Evan could respond, an aide hurried toward them. "Mr. Carter, the general requests you in the command briefing hall." Diaz whistled softly. "Here we go." Evan merely nodded. He wasn't anxious, Not proud, just steady. He followed the aide. Inside the briefing hall, high-ranking officers filled seats. The air held weight not hostile, but anticipatory. A podium stood at the front. The U.S. flag and flags of allied nations flanked the stage. Grace Whitmore stood alone, hands clasped behind her back, gaze straight ahead. When she saw Evan enter, her shoulders eased slightly, the smallest visible exhale of relief. Colonel Abrams sat rigid near the front jaw, clenched like a man choking on unspoken protest. Evan stopped just inside the doorway. "General." "Come forward," Grace said. There was no bark to her tone, no command layered in steel, only respect. He stepped toward the front, uncertain why, but trusting the presence of truth. Grace faced the assembled officers. Yesterday she began, voice steady. We stood at the edge of misunderstanding. Missteps could have cost us trust with allied partners and years of strategic progress. She let the silence settle, not dramatic, but reverent, and it was stabilized not by rank nor by protocol, but by a man who chose humility over recognition and service over comfort. Evan felt every eye shift toward him, not piercing, but curious, respectful. Grace continued, voice strong but warm. Mr. Evan Carter demonstrated exceptional composure, cultural intelligence, linguistic mastery, and most importantly, moral clarity. Abrams exhaled sharply, barely contained. Grace did not acknowledge him. This base and our mission were strengthened because of him. A ripple moved through the room, not applause, but the dignified weight of acknowledgement. Grace turned to Evan fully. "You once served in silence. You carried burdens without complaint. You walked away to protect peace within yourself. But service is not always a battlefield, and your gift is not meant to stay hidden." Evan's breath stilled. He did not like where this was going. Grace continued, carefully, gently, like handling something sacred. "Evan Carter, I am formally appointing you as Special Strategic Language and Cultural Advisor to Fort Mason with civilian authority and access equivalent to senior staff advisors." A low murmur spread surprise approval and, in Abrams' case, thinly veiled fury. Evan did not speak. His heart beat slow, heavy. He wasn't flattered, he was shaken. Grace lifted the official document. "This is not charity. It is recognition, earned in silence, delivered with honor." She held it out to him. He stared at it, not refusing, not accepting, suspended between who he was and who he was being asked to become again. "General," he said softly, "I left that world for a reason." Grace lowered her voice, not for secrecy, but intimacy of truth. "You did not leave service. You left pain." Their eyes locked, wounded heart to wounded heart. "And this," she said, "is not a call back to war. It is a call to purpose." He swallowed the weight of choice pressing against ribs that once held shrapnel and grief. "Who am I?" he murmured, "to advise leaders again?" "Who are you not to?" Grace replied gently. "You walked through fire without letting it turn you hard. That is leadership." His eyes glistened, not from pride, but from the ache of being seen so clearly it almost hurt. Abrams stood abruptly. "This is absurd. Emotional favoritism, nothing more." Grace cut him off with a look sharp enough to slice steel. "This decision stands." Abrams clenched his fists. "You can't rewrite his record." Grace turned fully toward him, voice quiet but lethal with truth. "I am not rewriting it. I am restoring what was stolen from him." A stunned hush fell. Evan closed his eyes. Truth spoken aloud feels heavier than silence ever did. He breathed once, deeply grounding himself. When he opened his eyes, there was something changed, not louder, not brighter, steadier, like a man remembering his spine was steel, not memory. He accepted the document, but gently, as if afraid to wake old wars. "Thank you," he whispered. "No," Grace replied, voice soft. "Thank you for surviving and choosing goodness." After the meeting, officers approached Evan one by one, not crowding, but offering brief nods, quiet acknowledgments. Warriors don't always shake hands. Sometimes respect is the way they hold their shoulders around you. Abrams stormed out jaw tight, a warning in his shadow. Diaz clapped Evan's shoulder. "Look at you, hermano, rising with no ladder." Evan smiled faintly. "Just walking." "Yeah," Diaz grinned, but now people finally see the footprints. Later, outside under late afternoon sunlight, Evan found Grace standing near the flagpole watching soldiers drill. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes," she replied quietly. "I did." He looked at her voice low. "I don't want a life of titles again." "And I didn't give you one," she said softly. "I gave you a platform to lift others." His chest ached, not with pain but with possibility. "I'm not sure I'm ready," he murmured. Grace's gaze gentled. "No one worth trusting ever feels ready. They just walk forward anyway." Wind moved her hair, softening the lines of authority into humanity. He looked at her a long moment, and for the first time hope did not feel like betrayal of memory. "Thank you," he said again. This time, not just for a role, but for seeing him. Grace nodded once close enough to almost touch his hand, but not crossing that line yet. The base does not know your full story. It does not need to. It knows your character. "And what do you know?" he asked quietly. She held his gaze. "That piece looks like you." He exhaled slow, like releasing something long held. And for the first time since he left the battlefield, he did not feel like a man escaping the past. He felt like a man stepping toward a future. Not alone, not invisible, not forgotten, but seen, valued, called. And that changes everything. Fort Mason settled into a new rhythm in the days following Evan Carter's appointment. Nothing dramatic changed, not outwardly. There were no trumpets, no handshakes on parade grounds, no newspaper headlines. That was never Evan's world. But subtle things shifted. A young ensign once too proud to greet a janitor now held doors open for him. Foreign officers asked for him by name. Carter, the man who listens before he speaks. Senior staff nodded when he passed, not as underling, but as peer. Humility carries a quiet gravity, and Fort Mason was beginning to orbit a new kind of strength. And yet every afternoon, when the sun dipped low over concrete barracks and flagpoles, Evan still walked his daughter home, still tied her shoelaces, still packed her lunch, still wiped down mop handles in the maintenance closet before heading home. He had climbed back into purpose, but he refused to climb away from simplicity. In the command wing, General Grace Whitmore reviewed logistics for upcoming training exchanges. Maps, digital reports, secure briefings, the language of command. She moved through them with a precision carved from decades of service, but lately her thoughts drifted. Not distracted, awakened. Sometimes to Evan's calm voice translating chaos into clarity. Sometimes to the way he crouched when speaking to soldiers junior to him, as though listening was a shared rank. Sometimes, and she hated how rare this had once been, to the soft warmth in her chest, when she recalled him calling peace a choice, not a condition. Duty had been her heartbeat, discipline her spine. But peace had been a stranger, until recently. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Evan stepped in, clipboard in one hand, humility in his posture, steadiness in his eyes. "You asked to see me, I did." She motioned to a chair. "How are you settling into the advisory role?" He sat still with that gentle respect, never assuming position, learning to walk without disappearing. She smiled, small, genuine. "And how does that feel?" "New," he admitted. A little strange. Like wearing an old uniform you're not sure still fits. You wear purpose well, Grace said softly. He chuckled a warm, low sound. Purpose wrinkles less than pride. She inhaled not a laugh, but a sound of recognition. I've seen pride ruin men who never saw a battlefield. And humility, steady men who walked through hell barefoot. Evan looked down briefly. Sometimes humility is just another word for rebuilding. And you're building well, she said. His eyes lifted, steady, grateful. So are you. Their silence wasn't awkward. It was full, like two people remembering they still had hearts inside all the armor. Days passed, and Evan's role grew naturally. He reviewed cultural briefings, helped soldiers navigate language barriers during joint operations. Prep advised quietly in meetings, without ever overshadowing trained staff. He made others better, not by leading loudly, but by steadying the room simply by being in it. Even Colonel Abrams grudgingly watched resentment simmering under discipline, but unable to deny the results. Still, command dynamics shifted, whispers floated. Carter speaks 9 languages. Carter once shielded a man with his body. General Whitmore trusts him. Trust in a military base is currency. And now some officers who once ignored him wanted proximity. Evan noticed, and kept his distance. Kindness is not the same as permission. But one afternoon, a soft voice broke his focus. Mr. Evan, he turned. Lily stood there, backpack askew, cheeks flushed from running. Behind her, a corporal smiled apologetically. She insisted on finding you herself. Evan kneeled. Everything okay, sweetheart? Lily grinned, holding up a drawing, him standing beside Grace. Lily between them holding both hands. You and General Grace are friends, she declared proudly. Evan flushed slightly. Grace, who had just stepped out of her office, paused mid-motion, hearing every word. He cleared his throat. We work together. No, Lily insisted solemnly. You're friends. I can tell. Grace approached, kneeling too. Medals and stars lowering themselves to meet a child's eye level. Well, she said softly, I would be very honored to call your father my friend. Lily studied her, then nodded like a queen granting approval. Good. He needs more happy. Evan's breath caught. Grace's eyes softened deeply, vulnerably. And what about you, Lily? Grace asked. Oh, I have, happy, Lily said confidently. But Daddy has quiet. Happy. He needs loud happy, too. Grace glanced at Evan, and this time the warmth in her eyes wasn't subtle. Maybe so. Lily beamed, hugged Grace impulsively, then darted off to find lemonade. Evan stared at the floor, suddenly shy, a man who could stand between nations, but stumbled under a child's truth. Grace murmured, She sees more than most adults. She sees hearts, Evan said quietly. Mine included. And mine. Grace asked before she could stop herself. Evan looked at her, steady, honest. Especially yours. Their stillness was tender, not romantic in declaration, but already love in foundation. Not a spark, not a fire. A sunrise. Even soldiers noticed something shifting. General looks softer lately, and Carter looks like he's remembering how to live. Don't say anything. Let it breathe. No gossip, just quiet reverence for healing. Because when you've seen men break, watching someone mend is holy. One evening, as base's lights blinked to life and bugle notes echoed across the grounds, Grace and Evan walked the perimeter path, side by side, not touching, but closer than distance allowed. Do you ever miss the uniform, she asked. Sometimes, he admitted. Mostly the purpose, not the noise. And now, he said quietly, I feel useful without feeling used. Grace breathed deeply, wind tugging gently at her hair, softening the harshness life carved. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone. But Maybe strength also means letting someone walk beside you. It does, Evan said softly. That's the kind of strength that builds instead of defends. They paused near the flagpole where the stars and stripes waved against a reddening sky. Do you ever feel guilty being happy? Grace asked suddenly the question, naked unshielded. Evan looked at her, not surprised, not judging. Every day. But I try to choose happiness anyway. For Lily. For me. For him, Grace whispered, touching the memory of her husband. Evan nodded. We honor the fallen by living fully, not by dying slowly in their shadow. Grace's breath trembled, relief-ache acceptance intertwined. No one has ever said that to me. You never needed someone to salute your sorrow, he said. You needed someone to sit with it. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. And what do you need, Evan? He thought for a long moment. To know I can move forward without betraying who I was. You haven't betrayed anything, she whispered. You've survived with goodness. Their eyes held two warriors who never asked life for mercy, finding it in each other. No grand declarations. No dramatic music, just quiet hearts choosing not to hide anymore. That night, Lily proudly taped her drawing to their small kitchen wall, Evan Grace. Lily holding hands beneath a bright sun. Evan looked at it, then at his daughter, whose hope was simple and pure. Then he looked out the window and saw Grace walking across the courtyard, pausing to wave at him through the glass. He lifted 2 fingers, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and she smiled a smile that didn't belong to generals or grieving widows, but to a woman rediscovering warmth. In that moment, Fort Mason wasn't a military base. It was a bridge between past and future, between duty and heart, between 2 lives learning to believe again. And a quiet voice inside Evan whispered, You don't walk alone anymore. Morning at Fort Mason always came early, but today it arrived with a different kind of light, softer, warmer, as though the sun itself understood the base had changed, not through ceremony, not through orders, but through something quieter, harder to measure, impossible to ignore. A man once invisible now carried a presence that steadied others, and a leader once armored now allowed herself to breathe. Evan Carter walked the main hallway, not pushing a mop today, though he still kept the handle polished and the bucket clean. Some habits, the honest ones, are anchors, not chains. But instead of a cart, he carried a binder of cultural protocols and diplomatic briefings, along with a handwritten note from Diaz. For the record, Hermano Heroics, look good on you. Just remember to eat. Evan shook his head at the note, smiling quietly. It was strange being cared for again by brothers, in boots, even if he no longer wore the same leather. He passed soldiers and officers. Some nodded. Some saluted instinctively before remembering he wore no rank. Others paused to say good morning. He answered each greeting gentle and unassuming. Respect doesn't need a uniform, it needs a soul worth seeing. Down the hall, he found Grace Whitmore in the command briefing room, finishing a discussion with Major Rhodes. Papers were spread across the table. Not crisis reports, but program drafts, schedules, diversity, and cultural mentorship proposals. This was a different battlefield now, one built on building instead of breaking. Rhodes spotted Evan first. "Good morning, Advisor Carter," she said with sincere professionalism, but her eyes carried quiet gratitude. "Morning," Evan nodded. Grace turned. Her face softened a look only a few would ever see from her. Not weakness, not loss. Restoration. "Right on time," she said. "You expected anything else?" he asked, smirking gently. The general almost smiled. "No. I've learned punctuality's your second language, and quiet is the first," Evan returned. Rhodes excused herself, tactfully leaving them alone. Grace crossed her arms, not in defense, but comfort. The council approved the new initiative. Training program, he asked. Not just training, she said. Opportunity. She opened a folder. Inside was a new program charter, Quiet Valor Initiative, identifying and developing talent among overlooked personnel, civilian enlisted, and veterans for strategic roles. Evan inhaled slowly. You built this. We built this, Grace corrected gently. Your journey deserves to become someone else's beginning. He looked at her, the weight of purpose settling not like burden, but blessing. How many people? As many as we can lift, she answered simply. A soft knock sounded. Lily poked her head in ponytail, crooked little backpack, dragging at her side. Daddy Evan walked over and crouched. Shouldn't you be in class? They said you're important. Now, she whispered conspiratorial. So I get to visit, he laughed softly, the kind of laugh born from healing, not humor. That's not how class works. Grace approached, kneeling as well. Lily, how about you help us with something? Lily's eyes widened. Me, yes, Grace said gently. We need ideas. If you could help all the people on this base feel seen, how would you do it? Lily considered, seriously, tongue pressed to her teeth, in deep 8-year-old concentration. Then, easy. Make sure everybody gets a smile every day. Grace blinked. Evan did too. Just one smile, Grace asked. No? Lily corrected. One real smile. Grace swallowed a quiet ache, warming her voice. I think we can work with that, Evan whispered. Smart kid. She's you without the scars, Grace murmured. He looked down, humbled. I hope so. You're making sure of it, she whispered back. Later, base personnel gathered in the courtyard. A formation of uniforms and civilians stood shoulder to shoulder, not for inspection, but announcement. Grace stepped forward. Presence, strong voice, steady. Fort Mason, she began, is built on discipline, loyalty, and strength. But true strength is not always loud. Sometimes it sweeps floors. Sometimes it walks with humility. Sometimes it rebuilds quietly after war. She paused, gaze sweeping the crowd. We honor every rank, every role. And today we begin a program that ensures no talent, no heart, no quiet hero goes unseen. Heads lifted, shoulders straightened. Because greatness does not always stand in the spotlight. Sometimes it stands alone in silence until someone notices. She looked at Evan, not introducing him, not spotlighting him, but anchoring him. Let us build a base and a military where every member knows they matter. Applause rose, not thunderous, but warm, meaningful. Not a roar, a welcome. After the ceremony, Abrams approached Evan's stiff-jawed, bitter pride clinging like armor. You didn't earn this through rank, no. Evan answered calmly. I earned it through life. Abrams' lip curled. You're still a janitor in my eyes. Evan nodded. Then I'm honored. Janitors keep the world clean. Harder job than tearing people down. Abrams flinched. Truth sometimes hits like shrapnel. Before he could answer, Grace approached. Colonel, you're needed in logistics. Abrams left fury quiet, but powerless. Grace turned to Evan. You handled that well. He shrugged. I've swept worse messes. She smiled, small, tender. And you keep doing it, even when the mess is human. His gaze held hers. I didn't climb. I was lifted. Her voice softened. And someday someone will say that because of you. Evening settled. Purple twilight brushed the flag. The bass played taps, softly, a long aching note of duty. Sacrifice memory. Evan stood with Lily at his side. She leaned against him. He placed a hand on her hair. Peace wrapped around him like a blanket finally earned. Grace approached slowly, hands clasped behind her back, then relaxed, letting them fall gently at her sides. Beautiful evening. "It is," Evan said. Lily tugged their hands and placed them together without asking. "There," she declared. "Looks better like that." Both froze, then looked at each other not with embarrassment but gentle truth. Evan didn't remove his hand. Grace didn't withdraw hers. Slow healing had brought them here to a moment simple, quiet, sacred. The wind lifted the flag. The last note faded. And in that silence, Evan spoke, voice low, steady. "You don't have to walk alone anymore." Grace's eyes shimmered, not with grief, but relief. "And you don't have to hide your strength." Lily beamed. "So we're a team now." Evan and Grace exchanged a look, quiet commitment, gentle certainty. "Yes," Grace said softly. Evan nodded. "A team. No flash of romance, no dramatic kiss. Just truth spoken in calm air, stronger than fireworks, deeper than vows. A promise born not from longing, but respect. Not from rescue, but recognition." 3 silhouettes stood beneath the flag, a general finally allowed to feel a veteran, finally allowed to heal, and a child who believed long before either dared to. The sun dipped painting gold over their faces, and the world for once felt still enough to whisper, "Here begins peace. Not loud, not bold, but real." Before we go, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Whether you're joining us from a quiet small town, a busy city, or somewhere peaceful in the countryside, you are part of this family here. If this story touched your heart gently, consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us continue bringing healing, hopeful stories for those who still believe in kindness, dignity, and second chances. And if you feel called to, feel free to share this video with someone who could use a little light today. Thank you truly for spending your precious time with us. Your presence here means more than you know. Until the next story, may warmth find your heart, and may peace walk beside you always.